Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back, guys and girls. Thank you for joining me again. It's greatly appreciated. Just a quick note, I am gonna buy a brand new webcam next week, so the camera quality will be a lot better going forward. I'm actually using my laptop's camera at the minute, and as you can see, it's not great. But that's neither here nor there. We will solve that issue next week. I was just gonna mention as well quickly, when we do watch these streams, it is a good idea to take notes because you can refer back to the book and to the stream and it will benefit you a lot. And also as well, just a quick one, this exposure therapy will only work if we put in the time and the effort. It's not going to be easy, but like I said before, if we slowly progress and make progression every single day and we commit to it, it's very successful and it's effective. But only we can help ourselves here. This book is good. It gives us the tools to do what we need to do to get better, but only we can implement them and help ourselves. So I just thought I'll throw that out there before we get started. And also just to mention as well, I'm going to be in and out of the camera because I've got some other work I need to do for my actual work. So I will be in and out, but please leave a like on the stream. It helps the algorithm out on the video and it helps me and it reaches more people. So let's get started.
Chapter 5. Give up thinking you're abnormal. Anxiety is not a mental illness. Your brain is not broken. You're not going to go insane. I don't say this just to make you feel better. I say it because it's true. The worst thing about anxiety is not how it feels physically, but rather the sneaky way it makes you think you're abnormal. Feeling abnormal is one of the most common experiences with anxiety. After experiencing high anxiety and stress hormones for a few months, almost everyone starts to fear for their sanity. I bet at some stage you felt like you're the only person in the world feeling the way you do. No one I know has these kinds of bizarre thoughts and feelings I have, so I must be mad. You're not your anxiety. You'll have gathered by now that a key element of the DARE response is to normalize anxiety as much as possible in order to escape its vicious cycle. Part of that normalization is learning to appreciate that you're not your anxiety. The anxious thoughts you experience are just thoughts and nothing more. They don't represent the real you. They're simply the result of stress hormones interacting with your vigilant, creative mind. You are also not the only person going through this experience. Remember, according to the National Institute of Mental Health, some 40 million American adults alone, about 1 in 6 of the population suffer from some kind of anxiety disorder at any given time. Translate those numbers and you see that as isolated as you feel with your anxiety, you're not alone. And your experience is in fact very normal. When you're out and about, reflect on that 1 in 6 statistic. You might have been thinking that no one else could be dealing with your particular anguish, but look again. That woman serving you breakfast might be fending off a panic attack. The irritated man in front of you in the bank might hate the claustrophobic sense of waiting in line. The mother driving the SUV might be afraid that she'll have a panic attack on the highway with a car full of kids. Anxiety is such a common problem, yet no one talks about it openly. The subject of mental health is still a taboo subject. Our celebrities happily talk on national TV about their colon cleansing or their sex lives, but rarely do they mention their mental health. That seems to be too personal, the topic, too vulnerable. With over 50 million yearly prescriptions written for just one anti-anxiety drug, Isn't it time we started to talk more openly about anxiety in particular and how common and normal an experience it is? If we could normalize the whole experience for society through the mass media, I think far few people would fall into the anxious trap of fearing fear. Has anxiety caused you to lead a double life? I hazard a guess that to the outside world you pretend that all is well, while inside you fear that you might lose your mind. A bit like a secret agent, you guard this secret from the world. I bet very few people would even suspect you have a problem with anxiety at all. Isn't it amazing how we can continuously portray one image to the world, while inside we feel completely tormented? Women are good at this, but men are the grandmasters of hiding anxiety away. I know all about that because I too used to be one of those secret agents. Someone once remarked to me while I was going through a particularly rough phase with my own anxiety that I seemed as laid back as a duck floating down a stream. What they never realized was that underneath the water, this duck was paddling like crazy just to stay upright. A few years ago, I was coaching a very well-known TV presenter who was plagued by the fear of having a panic attack live on TV. He was terrified that his colleagues might suspect something, so every day he entered the studio, he plastered on a smile and acted as if nothing could faze him. He kept all his fears and anxieties to himself for years. He didn't even tell his own wife about the daily torment he was going through every time he went on air. I bet you're an incredible actor. You pretend to the world that all is well and then secretly spend the day dodging and weaving any situation that might make you anxious. That double life is exhausting. You might have one or two close friends who suspect something because you frequently avoid certain situations, but by and large, the rest of the world, in your world, don't suspect a thing. Flying is a good example of how well people hide their fears. Statistics show about 30% of all passengers on any given flight are nervous about flying, and about 10% are extremely anxious. But it's hard to spot those 10% during a flight. They sit tight and secretly grip onto their armrests until their knuckles turn white, all without making a peep. They're going through sheer terror, but hide it well because an even greater fear, the fear of shame, the fear of humiliation. Anxiety and shame can play off each other in an almost comical manner. For example, let's say you're having lunch with some work colleagues. Suddenly your heart skips a beat and your chest tightens. In a split second, you convince yourself you're about to have a heart attack, but instead of asking them to call an ambulance, you excuse yourself politely and make for the bathroom. You would rather die alone from cardiac arrest in a toilet cubicle than cause a scene. I think you'll find that whenever you place the fear of humiliation above your fear of imminent death, anxiety is surely at play. Anxiety is a deep-seated source of shame for most people, and shame is a toxic feeling that keeps us stuck in the experience of an adrenaline flood and delays our full recovery. In order to begin healing our anxiety, we have to give up our sense of shame about it. If we expose it to the light of day, we'll see it for the lie it is. Shame manifests in different ways for anxious people. Shame of being weak, shame of failing as a mother or a father or a boss or a friend. Shame of not being able to support your family and provide an income. Shame of not being able to be out of your safe zone or go shopping alone without your safe person. Most of this shame is driven by negative self-talk. For example, a father dealing with anxiety might think, How can I, the man of the family, not be able to take my kids to a ball game? A college student might think, everyone else is so outgoing, yet I'm afraid to sit for even a few minutes in a lecture hall. A new mother might think, I have this amazing child that I cherish so much, but these anxious thoughts are stealing all the joy I should be feeling. How can I think such things? Am I a terrible mother? There are some people who don't hide their anxiety and seem happy to talk about it. But even then, the conversation tends to be at the surface level. If you dig a little deeper, however, you'll inevitably find that same shame lurking in them. Shame they don't want to share with anyone. Things they don't want to admit to for fear of being judged. Often the shame cuts very deep indeed. I got a phone call once from a woman who wanted to talk about her panic attacks and constant anxiety. She lived with her husband and kids in a small town. She told me how anxiety and panic attacks were destroying her quality of life, and every day was turning into a pitched battle. She used to travel all around the world for work as a sales executive for a large corporation, but she now found it hard to step outside the front door for fear of having a panic attack. I asked her if she had told anyone else about her anxiety problem besides her husband and doctor. She responded that she had let a few friends know, but in general she kept it to herself, fearing others might start to gossip about it. I then asked her what it was that really troubled her the most about her anxiety. She got a little irritated and said, haven't you been listening to me? I can't leave my home because of this, and I have kids to look after. What could be worse than that? No, I get that, I said, but what really troubles you about your anxiety? There was a long silence. Then after a moment she said, not leaving home is just the half of it. The other half, I could never admit to anyone. I'm too ashamed. Well, try me, I said. I'm pretty much a stranger. Just someone at the other end of a phone line. I don't imagine we'll ever meet in person. You've nothing to lose. Okay, she said, in touch with reality. I'm never present with my children because the whole time I'm thinking about my anxious thoughts. I told her that people can often admit to their doctor or close friends about their panic attacks, general anxiety, but they rarely admit to the things that really upset them the most. They hide their greatest fears so deep and suffer in terrible silence. It's normal, for example, for such people to be afraid to pick up a kitchen knife in case they go nuts and stab someone, or to get anxious behind the wheel of a car for fear of swerving uncontrollably into coming traffic. Or they hate to stand out in a balcony in case they suffer a moment of madness and jump off. Other shameful, anxious thoughts revolve around forbidden, aggressive, or perverse sexual thoughts, or doubts about one's own sexual identity. So many people suffer silently from these types of intrusive, anxious thoughts, and I wish they all had a chance to understand how very common they are. Such thoughts are very common and are not a sign of a mental illness, but rather a result of high anxiety, stress hormones, exhaustion, and an overactive imagination. That's it. I discuss these types of intrusive thoughts in the chapter, Give Up Fearing Your Anxious Thoughts. Letting go of the shame. In order to end any shame, you have to unmask it. You have to admit it first clearly to yourself. You need to be clear in your own mind about what it is that you could never admit to another. Then the healing can start. Shame is a lie that doesn't serve you in any way. When you expose it to the light of day, it loses its grip on you because it's human suffering with an anxiety problem. You're in good company. Some of the greatest minds in the world are believed to have suffered from anxiety, including the scientists Charles Darwin and Sir Isaac Newton. Famous artists and writers such as Alfred Lord Tennyson and T.S. Eliot, Marcel Proust, Emily Dickinson, the list is endless. All are believed to have suffered similarly. The link between creativity and anxiety is well established. Research shows that people who suffer from an anxiety problem tend to score higher than average on intelligence, creativity, and sensitivity. What happens, unfortunately, is that all those positive characteristics can turn in on themselves when stress and anxiety manifest. A sharp, intelligent mind rushes to diagnose all unusual patients, and when it draws a blank, the anxiety takes over and jumps to irrational conclusions. Deepak Chopra wrote, "The best use of imagination is creativity. The worst use of imagination is anxiety." The sensitive personality with a creative streak often uses its imagination to come up with scary scenarios straight out of a horror movie. How often have you felt a sensation and then let your imagination run riot with everything imaginable that might go wrong? The mechanics of anxiety. To further help you understand and normalize anxiety, let's take a closer look at what actually causes anxiety and the bodily sensations associated with it. I'm sure most of you have heard of the fight or flight response coined by Walter Cannon. This is at the core of your stress response. As I mentioned earlier, this is an automated survival mechanism that has enabled mankind to survive in a very harsh and dangerous natural world. If a saber-toothed tiger crossed your path 8,000 years ago looking for its lunch, your body's survival mechanism would have flooded you with adrenaline so fast you could have escaped in a flash if you were lucky. The interesting thing about the fight or flight response is how it takes over complete control in that moment of danger. The conscious brain is not consulted. Everything is about immediacy. You hear stories where people jump out of the way of oncoming traffic or perform amazing physical feats such as lifting up an automobile to rescue someone trapped underneath, when this response is suddenly activated. Operating the fight or flight response is the limbic system, a complex set of brain structures that lies in the middle of your brain, what is also referred to as the emotional brain. The amygdala is a central part of the limbic system, and it sets the whole series of events in motion by sending a red alert message to the hypothalamus to fire up the nervous system and prepare for danger. The adrenaline glands above the kidneys are then instructed to release adrenaline and cortisol into the bloodstream. You know very well what that feels like. It's an unmistakable feeling when adrenaline is flooding your system. Boom. All of a sudden you feel pumped and either highly excited or highly anxious. Note that adrenaline by itself doesn't make you feel scared. It makes you feel really aroused and alert. Remember, what causes the problem is your interpretation of the stress response. When you learn to change your interpretation, using the DARE response, you change the way you experience stress and anxiety. The fight or flight response happens in a split second. The impact of these hormones is felt immediately as your heartbeat and breathing increase. Your blood is drawn away from routine functions like food digestion and pumped into your muscles so that you can get out of there fast or stand and fight your threat. As all of this is happening, your muscles contract in preparation for an attack, and your bowels and bladder relax. It's all an incredibly and ingenious biological response to keeping you safe from harm. The fight or flight response is a survival mechanism designed to keep you safe from a threat. And threat is the key word here. In your case, the problem is almost always never a real threat. You just sit down to get your hair cut and boom, off it goes. Or you get in your car and as soon as you encounter traffic on the freeway, boom, another flood of adrenaline is triggered by your emotional brain. There's no real threat, but your body is acting like there is one because you're sending the message that there is danger. Take the example of having to give a presentation or a public speech. Your logical brain knows a speech won't kill you. No one is going to physically threaten you on the podium, but your emotional brain is responding to the fear of being judged or socially ostracized. Your emotional brain has not evolved to decipher between real danger and imagined threats. You can actually trick your brain quite easily into believing an imaginary thing is real. For example, imagine for a moment you're sucking on a piece of lemon. Think of that just a moment and your mouth begins to produce saliva. The lemon is imagined, but your brain has led your body to think this experience is real and to respond appropriately. The same applies to fear. Your emotional brain imagines a threat, then hijacks your rational brain and takes over the show. Your body's response follows in a very real and physical way with the fight or flight response. Let's look at some of the typical bodily sensations of the fight or flight response. Understanding these in detail will help you normalize each and every one of them so that you can implement the DARE response easier. Number 1, pounding heart. If you were truly threatened, you wouldn't even notice your heart pounding in your chest. You'd be far too busy fleeing to safety, and even if you did notice it, you'd expect it to be pounding. When you watch a scary movie or are about to do an interview, you know that a pounding heart is normal. But what if you can't identify any reason at all for your pounding heart? Then your mind rushes to the conclusion that a pounding heart must mean something is wrong. This is probably the single greatest cause of concern for people. As soon as the fight or flight response is activated and no threat is identified, most people then rush to the conclusion that they're having a heart attack. Why wouldn't they, right? Their hearts are beating like crazy for no reason and they're having all the bodily sensations we associate with a heart attack. For example, pins and needles, chest pain, dizziness. This is why so many people end up in the hospital ER claiming they're having a heart attack, only to be told later it was just anxiety. And please note, you should of course always get your heart checked if you have any concern about it, even for peace of mind. Number 2, increased breathing. When you're anxious, your rate of breathing increases. Immediately, your anxious mind rushes to the conclusion that something is wrong and you try to take control of your breathing. What a job to take on. The more you try to manage your breathing, the more uncomfortable you feel. This quickly increases your fear and anxiety as your mind plays all kinds of scenarios, such as having to go to the hospital and have a machine manage it for you. The other negative side effect of all this is that there's usually a slight drop in the amount of oxygen and blood sent to the brain, which can lead to a feeling dizzy and confused. In extreme cases of overbreathing, you can feel extreme pins and needles in your arms and hands, even to the point of hand cramps where your thumb and fingers close together. Corpedal spasm. This is not dangerous, but it is, of course, very distressing. Number 3, excess nervous energy. If you were to run from or stay and fight a real threat, all the excess nervous energy created by adrenaline would dissipate easily. With an unidentified threat, however, you don't move, and that nervous energy lingers in your system longer than it normally would. This can make you feel uncomfortable for an extended period of time and also make you shake or feel jittery and on edge. You want to get up and walk around, get outside or be on your own. Sometimes that's possible, but if you're in a situation where it's not easy to excuse yourself, you start to feel claustrophobic and you get more anxious, creating muscles tension, tremors. As you prepare for fight or flight, your muscles tense, particularly in the neck and upper body. With no physical exertion, the tension lingers in your muscles for way too long, leaving you feeling uptight and stiff. You may also notice that your muscles shake or that you have tremors in reaction to the adrenaline in your system. You may feel your legs start to shake or even witness your entire body shaking like a leaf. Number 5, sweating. Sweating increases during fight or flight in order to cool you down when running or fighting a threat. The main negative side effect of this during a false alarm is the social embarrassment that comes with it. If your fight or flight response is triggered by a social event like having to give a speech or do an interview, excessive sweating can make you feel even more self-conscious and anxious. Number 6, dizziness. The dizziness felt during an episode of panic or anxiety is often caused by increased respiration. You tend to overbreathe, that's hyperventilate, when you're anxious, which can lead to dizziness or lightheadedness. Passing out when highly anxious is very rare because fainting is the result of low blood pressure. When you feel anxious, your blood pressure goes up, not down. Hence, fainting is unlikely because your brain has plenty of blood supply. Number 7, bowels and bladder loosen. When experiencing anxiety, you likely feel the need to go to the bathroom. This is one of the more bizarre features of the survival response, but it's thought to occur in order to make running away easier as you'll carry less weight. The big side effect of this today is the abject terror of soiling yourself in public. This is extremely uncommon, but you may have this phobia that manifests as a fear of not being near a bathroom. This is a fear that's more common in women. Number 8, digestion and salivation slow down. The reason you feel butterflies in your stomach when the fight or flight response is activated is that the digestive system is shut down and blood is drawn from your stomach area and sent to your muscles and other vital organs. The problem with this is that it can lead to feelings of nausea, a very heavy feeling in the stomach, and a fear of vomiting. Again, if you're out in public, this can easily feed into a social anxiety. The other area that slows down is saliva production, leading to the uncomfortable sensation of dry mouth. Number 9, anticipation, worry, derealization. The fight or flight mechanism puts your brain on alert to anticipate all possible threats, as well as those that have not manifested yet. This is why it turns inward when it fails to find an external threat. Like a hound dog, it's on the trail for all possible threats and tries to seek out where the next threat might come from. If you're continuously anxious, this turns into chronic worry or the what ifs. Eventually, a worry about things becomes a worry about thoughts, where you worry about the very contents of your mind and fear you're going nuts. There's a very particular sensation, not often mentioned in other literature, called derealization, that occurs after a person has been suffering from general anxiety for some time. It's a sense of unreality, as if all the world is an illusion. This sensation causes people to feel very abnormal and is one of the more unsettling sensations associated with anxiety. I discuss it in more detail in a later chapter, but suffice to say, it's not harmful, and once the general anxiety level is reduced, this sensation ends. Don't buy into the labels. As mentioned previously, I try to avoid using the word disorder when talking about anxiety problems because I think it encourages people to buy into a label when An assortment of symptoms could be evidence of a wide variety of situations and resolved in very different ways. If the goal is to normalize anxiety, we need to demystify it and not get lost in the clinical jargon mental health professionals are so fond of. Remember that anxiety is a temporary problem. Do not define your life by it. You're not a label. But my problem is very complex. My doctor told me I have OCD with generalized anxiety disorder and a sprinkling of panic disorder to boot. Yes, you may well have all the symptoms and behaviors that fit neatly into the clinical definition of an anxiety disorder, according to the DSM. That's the American Psychiatric Association. It's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. But when you zoom back out, you'll see the core problem is one and the same: anxiety manifesting in various ways. It all falls under the same umbrella, and healing it is brought about with the application of the correct approach. I can appreciate why the medical community uses these labels. It's the nature of science to reduce symptoms and behaviors to distinctive categories so that they can better understand them. The trouble is that such cold diagnostic labeling has an impact on how people perceive themselves. Vulnerable people can leave a doctor's care thinking that the label assigned to them is now who they are. What's worse is that there's a huge amount of subjectivity when people are diagnosed using the DSM. Although rates of consistency have improved, the diagnosis of mental health issues like anxiety disorders remains very much more an art than a science. My heart goes out to all those people who seek a solution to what they're experiencing, and all they get is a diagnostic label and a long-term prescription for medication. These people leave the doctor's office feeling even more abnormal than when they walked in the door. The goal of this book is to do the opposite for you. It's designed to teach you that even though you're having these very uncomfortable and strange experiences, you are in fact totally normal. When you learn to normalize your experience of anxiety, you heal it much faster. In closing, let me reiterate the point I made at the start of the chapter. You are not your anxiety. As abnormal as it makes you feel, this anxiety is not the real you. It's not who you are or who you have become. Once your anxiety levels start to drop through the application of the DARE response and the stress hormones are slowly flushed from your system, you'll start to feel a whole lot more like your old, confident self again. Trust me on that. Chapter 6. Give up saying no to anxiety. The bamboo which bends is stronger than the oak which resists. Japanese proverb. One of the hardest steps of the DARE response for most people is the second step, the idea of dropping resistance and really allowing and accepting the anxiety. The goal of this chapter is to help you achieve that by teaching you to move more fully with each anxious wave of anxiety. My family used to have this great dog called Shadow. He was a cross between a collie and a black Labrador. He used to sit all day in the front room of our house, waiting for anyone to come to the front door. When someone would finally arrive, he'd go absolutely bonkers. Until we invited the person in, that is. If we kept the person at the door, for example the FedEx guy, Shadow would bounce off the walls, barking loudly with all the hair on his back standing straight up. No matter how hard we tried to tell him to lie down and stop barking, he wouldn't listen. His reasoning was, I'm the guard dog of this house, and if my owner doesn't invite a person in, then that person is unwanted and therefore a threat. I sometimes used to keep friends standing at the door for a few minutes and then let them in, if they were brave enough, just to see the changes in Shadow's reaction. It was the same every time. Once they passed the front door, he immediately stopped barking and sat back down on his seat. Anxiety is just like a guard dog. It's your protector. It's your fight or flight response activated by the emotional part of your brain, designed to keep you from harm. It needs you, the owner, your rational brain, to reassure it that the unusual bodily sensations that pay you a visit are not a real threat and that all is well. But as we've seen, just saying everything is okay, calm down, doesn't work. Just like shadow, anxiety responds much better to your actions. You need to mentally allow the anxiety in. If you keep the door and anxiety closed, your emotional brain thinks that the threat is real and there is something to be afraid of. When you invite your anxious sensations in with total acceptance of them, your emotional brain, your guard dog, backs off and calms down. Charlotte Joko Beck says, "We have to face the pain we've been running from. In fact, we need to learn to rest in it and let its searing power transform us." I love the way Beck expresses what's at the very core of real acceptance, to rest in it and let its searing power transform us. Learning to rest in anxiety is the way you heal it. Resting in the uncomfortable sensations gives your mind and body a chance to relax and detoxify from the stress response. So when you feel fear or anxiety surface, instead of pushing it aside, whisper to yourself, "It's okay." Give a gentle yes to the moment and what you're feeling. Acceptance of the anxiety brings a sense of peace and understanding that all will be okay in time. Nobody wants to feel anxious. Who would? It's a really uncomfortable, unsettling experience. But not wanting to experience anxiety isn't going to make it any better or make it go away. Frustration and stress are all that comes from wishing things were different than they are. The way you feel right now is the way it is. You don't have to love your anxiety. You just have to permit it. Carl Rogers wrote, "Acceptance is a precondition of change." Acceptance of your current state is your freedom from it, as it allows for a positive change to happen. Saying yes to anxiety opens you up to the energy and vitality that are behind the anxiety, so that you can transform it from something fearful into something positive. I accept and allow this anxious feeling. When you say yes in this way, you increase your tolerance of anxious sensations. With this heightened tolerance, the tension you feel is reduced and eventually eliminated. As a side effect, you end up getting what you want. You end up feeling calm. The anxiety leaves not because you forced it away, but because you're no longer fueling it with resistance and fear. Saying yes is the very essence of the DARE response. Please don't think that saying yes to anxiety is about giving in or surrendering to it. Saying yes is a statement of empowerment, not subjugation. This is about you calling a truce to the civil war you've been waging against yourself. Saying yes comes from the powerful and grounded you. I know that it's easy to agree in principle with saying yes to anxiety, but it's much harder to implement. When you use this approach, you have to pay attention to your thought processes as you engage with your anxiety. Many people think they're saying yes when in fact they're still saying no. They're willing to take a few tentative steps towards the anxiety, but they're scared of it swamping them and therefore hold back and never really do it 100%. Let me give you an example of Christine, who I was speaking with recently. Her anxious sensations were a lump in her throat and dizzy sensations. She fears she might faint when she's outside her home, even though she's never fainted before. She said to me, "I'm trying your approach to stop the anxiety, but it's not really working. It's not going away. What am I doing wrong?" I drew her attention to her choice of words. Trying your approach to stop the anxiety. It's not going away. I explained to her that to really do the DARE response correctly, she has to stop saying no to the anxiety and ease herself into the anxious discomfort. She can't hide from it or try to stop it from happening. In Christine's case, that means she needs to go to the places where these sensations manifest. At the shopping mall in her case, and sit there with them, not push them away, but become the observer of them and get comfortable in the anxious discomfort. I explained to Christine that pushing these sensations away or trying to make them stop is not acceptance of them. She needs to allow them to be present and say yes to the anxiety all day long. "Come on, lump in the throat, let's go shopping. Hey, dizzy spells, you're coming with us too." When you attend and befriend, you move yourself out of fight or flight. That's what saying yes is really about. That stops the inner friction and allows your thoughts and emotions to flow with the waves of anxiety that you feel. It isn't about pretending to like the sensations. It's about having an open and embracing attitude towards them. This attitude allows you to now go places and still have a good time, regardless of whether the sensations are present or not. Christine found it hard to accept the sensations initially because she feared allowing them in would only cause them to get worse. Maybe you feel the same way. Maybe you fear that inviting in and befriending the thing that scares you will only cause you to go over the edge. This is where you'll really have to trust me and this process. You've already experienced your worst anxiety episodes. What's happening since then is that you're keeping that anxiety locked in place with your resistance to it. This resistance is the quicksand that's keeping you stuck. When you stop saying no and drop the resistance, you gradually pull yourself out of the muck. I think the process of accepting anxiety is a bit like learning not to scratch an itch that really irritates you. In the beginning, the itch is all you can think about, and you keep going back to scratch it to get some relief. Scratching the itch, of course, just makes it worse, and then you become obsessed by the irritation it's causing you. Through acceptance, you eventually learn to sit with the discomfort of the itch without scratching it. You focus on your day and allow the itch to be there without scratching it. It's not easy to do, especially in the early stages, but slowly the itch starts to be less of an irritant, and you notice it less and less until eventually it's gone. The same thing happens when you accept and stop resisting your anxiety. You're no longer responding to it in a negative way. Your brain eventually filters it out and you no longer notice its presence. As soon as you stop responding to it in fear, you stop fueling it and set yourself free from its discomfort. It's not that you'll never have anxious sensations again. They'll manifest from time to time, especially when you're stressed or exhausted. But you now have a default way of responding to it. You say yes to it. I've already made reference to the fact that battling anxiety is like having a tug of war with your anxiety. The more you pull against it, the harder anxiety pulls back. The tension and friction you feel comes from the rope that you're holding so tightly. You fear letting it go in case you lose the battle. By learning to say yes to the anxiety, you drop the rope and the resistance. It's okay to feel scared. Anxiety is a really scary experience. Allow yourself to feel scared if that's how you're feeling. Allow yourself to feel vulnerable. The more you allow yourself to just accept the way you are right in this moment, the faster the charged emotion of fear will dissipate. Remember, the wave rises and falls. These are just thoughts and feelings. They can't hurt you. The only power they have over you is the power and meaning you give them. So give them no significance or meaning. Normalize them and let them pass. Embrace the anxiety without any judgment and without opinion. Say yes with a smile and allow yourself to feel whatever manifests. If you do this 100%, the feeling will shift within a few moments into something else. Sensations change from moment to moment. It won't be gone, but it will transform into a more tolerable feeling simply by saying yes to it and allowing it space. Allowing all uncomfortable thoughts and emotions their space is key. There's a popular metaphor of the blue sky obstructed by grey clouds. It comes from the mindfulness teachings where you imagine your mind is like the bright blue sky and your anxious feelings are the dark clouds that roll below. No matter how many dark clouds appear, the bright blue sky is always there in the background watching. The blue sky allows the dark weather to come and go, no matter how unpleasant it looks. Eventually, the bad weather passes and you're left with the bright blue sky again. Acceptance and allowance of what is takes practice. In the beginning, you'll certainly feel the urge to say, no, I don't want this. You'll feel the storm brewing and think, I don't like the look of this, or I don't want to feel this. That's a natural response, so just allow that thought of resistance to come up, observe it, and allow it to be present as well. All storms pass. The dark grey clouds of anxiety will drift away faster if you allow them space to do so. You might also have some resistance coming up towards this book and me. You will question if I really know what I'm talking about. You'll have thoughts about dropping this approach and going back online to find some other solution that asks less of you. Allow that resistance to simply exist as well. Give it space and just observe it. Smile inwardly as you know this is just a game between you and your anxiety. Saying yes puts you back in your flow, which is an open, soft, and compassionate attitude towards all the things that you feel. It's like a cool stream of water that calms your nervous system. It shifts you from a state of fight or flight to one of rest and digest. In her excellent book, Hope and Help for Your Nerves, Dr. Claire Weekes wrote about flow by using the concept of floating with anxiety. The DARE response relates to that same concept that she wrote about over 50 years ago. You float or flow with the nervous arousal, and in so doing, the anxiety is diminished. When you flow with your anxiety, the dark clouds quickly pass and are replaced by the blue sky. If you do this right, you'll be surprised by how fast the anxious feelings and sensations change. But remember, don't look for that change or try to force it to happen. Allow it to happen in its own time. The paradox of healing anxiety is that you're attempting to generate a positive change while simultaneously being okay if that change doesn't happen right away. Crazy, right? But that's just the way it is. Here's how a client of my coaching program put it. What has been bothering me about my progress and the whole program is that it does seem paradoxical. Okay, I will accept you so I can be rid of you. I'm really good at realizing that I'm actually safe and that the sensations won't hurt me. What I haven't been that good at is going along with the sensations. Now I see that I just have to go along doing whatever I need or plan to do while having the sensations and not so much distract myself from them, but just not give them space in my head. Always be playful with this approach. Say yes to the anxiety with a playful attitude. That can mean having a humorous running commentary with yourself and a smile on your face as anxious thoughts and feelings rise up from out of nowhere. Another client described that running commentary like this: I get great results when I joke with my anxiety. Ah, there you are, or there's that bodily sensation that usually scares me. How interesting. I wonder what scary thoughts are going to now come along with that sensation. Come on, Daffy Duck, and all your scary thoughts. Don't hide. I'm not going to bite, I just want to see you. I'm not going to get frustrated with you or run away from you. In fact, do you want to spend some time with me? I'm going into town now, so why don't you come along for the ride? Each time the anxiety pulls at you, attend and befriend it. Smile inwardly and say, yes, you're welcome to come in. Take a seat. I'll be with you in a minute. If anxiety continues to pull at you with frightening what-if thoughts, think, okay, whatever, I hear you. You can stay, but I've this thing I have to finish, so I'm just going to do that. I'm not pushing you away. I just don't think this is as urgent as you, anxiety, are making it out to be. Toward the end of my own recovery, I used to get these random waves of anxious thoughts that felt like a punch to the stomach. As soon as I felt these, I knew it was time to say yes and implement the DARE response. I would start by reminding myself not to resist any of the thoughts, no matter how. Before, the old me would scream, no, not now. Then, sure as day, a huge wave of anxiety would suddenly pound me and I would think, no more, and whoosh, another 40-foot wave would hit me. Wave after wave of fear and anxiety would slam dunk me to the point where I was lost in sea of adrenaline and fear. Once I learned the DARE response and how to say yes instead of no, these waves of fear and anxiety soon became nothing more than small ripples. Flash fear and response fear. There are two types of fear connected to anxiety. Dr. Weeks calls them first and second fear. I call them flash fear and response fear. Flash fear is a wave of intense sensations. This fear is so immediate and sudden that you've no control over it. Response fear is your response to the initial flash fear. The DARE response is about training yourself to now have the right response to the flash fear. Response fear is where all the trouble starts. It's where the anxiety loop begins and where your suffering comes from. If you don't have any response fear, all you'd have would be brief moments of unusual sensations that would flash momentarily on your consciousness. I believe everyone has flash fears all the time, but they don't develop into a problem, a disorder, because they aren't followed by any great amount of response fear. When your general anxiety level is stuck at a high level, you'll frequently experience these flash fears. Those moments where you have a sudden scary thought followed by a jolt in your nervous system. It can almost manifest as a strange feeling that flashes over you while you're chatting to someone or busy at work. Maybe it's a sudden sense of impending doom, apprehension, or unreality. They can also be triggered by a memory of a past situation. These flash fears happen with such immediacy that you have no control over them. Flash fears can also be physical. For example, your heart suddenly starts pounding and you feel dizzy or your stomach knots. Your fight or flight response has suddenly been activated for whatever reason. These are sensations that happen so fast, you've no immediate control over them. Next comes your response. Up until now, it's been one of fear and an immediate wave of flash fear that comes without warning. Response fear, which comes next, however, is something you do have control over. It's something you actively do, even though it also happens quite fast. Response fear is the what if thinking that says, what the was that? Oh no, is something terrible going to happen now? This happened before and I ended up in ER. I'm about to have another panic attack. Response fear feeds off the flash fear through what ifs and quickly escalates into a state of high anxiety. What started off as an uncomfortable bodily sensation has turned into a full-blown panic episode through response fear. If flash fear is like nibbling the bait, response fear is falling for the lure, hook, line, and sinker. This is why the very first step in the DARE response is to diffuse those what-if flash fears as soon as they manifest. Everyone experiences flash fears to some extent. The difference is that a person with high anxiety experiences them with greater frequency and more intensity than a person who's not particularly stressed. Complete acceptance of all flash fears is crucial. I'm fully aware that training yourself to have the right response to flash fear is difficult. In the beginning, your initial response will still be the wrong one. That is just habit. As long as you immediately correct it, though, you prevent it from spiraling out of control, and you'll get the desired result. Eventually, the correct response will become automatic and second nature to you. I bet in the past, you used to experience the same flashes of anxious bodily sensations that scare you now. Back then, though, you didn't pay them too much attention, as you weren't in a sensitized state. They simply didn't register on your radar. Now, however, you're highly sensitized and attuned to every sensation. You have your anxiety radar set to maximum alert and pick up on absolutely everything, every little hiccup, every heartbeat out of place. By applying the DARE response and saying yes to anxiety, you start responding to anxious sensations much like you did before there was ever a problem. You don't respond with fear. You slowly begin to relearn that there's nothing wrong with you to begin with.
Right, everyone, we're going to end it there for today. So we covered quite a lot in that section. Like I said, if you could please leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel as well, it really helped me out. Also check out my Facebook group. If you aren't already in my Facebook group, join that, because I will be doing some CBT exercises later on today, so I probably will upload that on here as well. But right, guys, thank you for joining me. All the best, and I'll see you tomorrow.